All right, guys, welcome back to Falcon Central Radio Show on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. Again, I'm Aaron Freeman, joined by my co-host Scott Karasik. We want to thank Brian Finneran of 680 The Fan. You can check him out on Twitter at bfin86. We just chatted with Brian about the Falcons' upcoming season, their expectations. If you missed that interview, then you can check out the audio on our iTunes feed, where you can find all the links there at profootballcentral.com. Scott, let's get into the rest of this thing, talking about this Falcon team and their upcoming matchup against the Bears.
I'm excited for this matchup with the Bears, but I think we have some cuts, I guess we could say, to talk about.
Yes. We were on a little bit of a 2-week hiatus, and there are a lot of roster moves that happened in that 2-week period. So we won't go through all of them because we'll be here for 3 hours if we did. But let's talk about the 53-man roster, which occurred last week with the final cuts this past weekend. And, we got a couple of questions about our thoughts on the 53-man roster from some of our listeners. Digital Demon at Digital Demon 6 on Twitter asked, were there any surprises about the 53-man roster?
Nick Williams. And I thought Bleedy Ray Wilson was kind of just useless. And they would have been better off keeping Quincy Mojay. And I know I bad talked Quincy Mojay all throughout preseason, but he showed up those last 2 games. Quincy Mojay, or even kept like a Marcellus Branch type instead of Bleedy Ray.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't think there were too many major surprises. I thought Bleedy Ray and Nick Williams had probably a better shot than a lot of people did of making the team. I did think that Marvin Hall would wind up making it as a 6 wide receiver, and instead he's on the practice squad. So it didn't catch me totally off guard, but I did think he did enough this preseason to sort of surpass Nick Williams and win that spot. Bleedy Ray, I think, basically found a spot on the defense that was opened up by Rashid Hageman. That was probably the biggest surprise, just because we hadn't heard in over a year really any updates on sort of his legal situation. So it seemed like we had moved past it, and so to find out that he was going to be put on the commissioner's exempt list and essentially be indefinitely suspended until that gets rectified. That was probably the biggest surprise with the roster move. Obviously, the Falcons cut Hageman yesterday, and so thus ends the Rashid Hageman saga in Atlanta. I'm curious, Scott, did you have any other thoughts that you wanted to say about that whole situation?
I kind of want to get into it a little bit later, because I'm not a fan of the indecision that the front office had in that whole situation. But overall, not a fan of Hageman getting cut, but I get why they did it. I just think if you're going to cut him for the reason that they did cut him, you got to do it a year earlier. They should have cut him before last year. But I'm going to get into that a little bit later.
Okay. Well, I'll be waiting with bated breath. We did get another question from Digital Demon. He asked, what are your thoughts on the depth on the offensive line and the starters? I guess at least with the offensive line portion of the question, 2 significant moves that the Falcons did make in the last.
I think he's talking about the O-line as a whole, like O-line starters and O-line depth.
Yeah, fair enough. I think that's a good segue for us to talk about the 2 major roster additions that the Falcons have made in the last 2 weeks that we hadn't had the opportunity to talk about on this show, which was they picked up Austin Pastor and traded for Ty Sambrailo. Does this feel like, in your eyes, Scott, solve some of the question marks with the offensive line depth, which I think most of us thought, at least watching them in the preseason, was probably the biggest weakness on the team?
I think it helps out a lot. I'm a big fan of Ty Sambrailo. He's been injured the last 2 years. He seems to finally be healthy. He looked great in the preseason for the Broncos. I think the only reason why they they traded him was because they were like, well, we've got Garrett Bowles, we've got this other guy on the right side we like, and I think it's Schofield.
Yeah.
Their guy on the right side. So I mean, we got Garrett Bowles, we got Schofield. He's not going to start, not going to use a second round pick on the swing tackle. So Oh no, they got Menowitz Watson. And they also got Donald. He's like the fourth good tackle on that team. They don't really need him. Atlanta needed him. Atlanta got traded a fifth-round pick. I just like that Atlanta can go out and sign him, sign Pastore, trade for Sanbrilla in their backups 2 years ago. Trade for Pastore or sign Pastore and traded for Sanbrilla and started. And Chester. They like built that offensive line 3 weeks before the season. Now they built the offense 3 days before the season. Now they're just adding a couple of 2 weeks before the season. Sanbrello is going to be very athletically he's compared to never been an issue with us. It's been an issue of technique. Not intelligence. Once everything kind of slows down, with stop. You know,
All right. Are we still live? All right. All right.
Can you hear me now? Sorry about that.
No problem. No problem. This is the night of technical difficulties. So I had one, you had one. So it's good.
It's all good. Where was I when it cut? Talking about Pastore and Sanbrello?
Yeah, I think you were pretty much wrapping up that.
Yeah, basically I just think Sanbrello, the reason why he got destroyed by Vic Beasley was they didn't give him any help. The Broncos didn't give him any help. They needed to chip Beasley. They needed to help him out with the running back. It's just a too big of a matchup. But outside of that, I think he's a good, solid player. I think he's better than Tom Compton. And I think he's definitely a good run blocker. The issue for him is pass protection against speed guys. So you just give him a chip. You know, you've got a guy who can give chips back. You've got multiple guys who can give chips back there and be effective, whether it's Ward, whether it's Freeman, whether it's Coleman. I trust all 3 of those guys to not get Matt Ryan killed and help Sanbrello square the guy up. So as long as you give him a chip, I think he's fine. I think Pastore is the same kind of guy. Like, I think Sanbrello and Pastore are the same kind of guy. Although Pastore is probably better inside. And then for me, the only question is what happens with Sean Barlow, because I know he probably won't play it down this year.
Yeah, I don't know if I have anything else to add. I think, the Falcons did the thing that they always do. We'll find out if Pastore and Sanbrello, hopefully we never get to find out, but this is a decent chance.
We never find out.
Yeah, but there's a decent chance that we'll see one of those guys play some snaps this year. Hopefully it's in garbage time. But, I think you can't always predict what's going to happen. And I think the one thing I was always critical of Dimitroff and Mike Smith prior to Dan Quinn's arrival, and haven't been as critical of Dan Quinn because very few times has he not been this, is you got to be proactive. That's all you got to be. Like, you're going to swing and miss times. Like Pastore and Sanbrello could very easily be plugged into the lineup and be terrible. And we'll be looking at offensive line depth as a major issue that we got to address next offseason. But at the very least, the team attempted to make an upgrade at those 2 spots and get some serious depth, some experienced depth, guys that have started games. Pastore has over 40 starts in the league. Sanbrello has single digits, I think, largely because of injuries. Hasn't played particularly well in his starts, partially due to injuries. But it's one of those things where I applaud the team for looking at the situation with Brunskill or Graf or Tia or Kanapi and saying that's not going to be good enough. We know that's not going to be good enough. At least with Pastor and Sambrelo, we got a shot. And so that's all you can really say. And we'll find out if they're good enough. If not, then at least they made an attempt. I can't fault people for effort, and that's always was my biggest criticism of the previous regime, is that they never really made an effort to make upgrades. And this regime has shown that, going back to 2015 with all the changes they made at the offensive line, at least in the starting lineup, heading into that first game. And now over the last couple of weeks with their depth. So, and it's not just the offensive line. They've done it over the course at various other positions. So it's a thumbs up for me, even if those guys aren't necessarily who I would have chosen to be the best possible candidates to sort of solidify the offensive line depth. So that's what I'll say about that.
I'm cool with Sambrelo. I think he's better than what they could have had. He's definitely better than Kanapi and Brunskill and Tia. So I'm not too worried about them. Hopefully we get the starting five, and the only time they have to play a backup is if they're blowing someone out and they just want to keep the guys fresh. That's the best thing they need.
There you go. All right, let's unless you got any thoughts on Jamil Douglas or Jordan Tripp, Scott, we can sort of move on to this Bears game.
I've got a small thought on Jordan Tripp. So when I was doing the calculations for athleticism back in Jordan Tripp's draft, he was one of the top guys for it. And he is comparable to Sean Weatherspoon as an athlete. It has shown up on the field. He's a good special teamer, but the mental side at playing linebacker hasn't fully shown up for him yet. It's cool. I think that as long as he's a special teams guy and a like reserve linebacker, he'll be fine. And I think that's what he's going to be his entire time here. I think they got a good one for that role, and basically think Paul Warlow if he played fast.
Okay. All right.
And wasn't missing tackles.
Okay. I'm glad you had that caveat, because I didn't think too positively of Paul Warlow, even if he was fast. But
think like rookie Paul Warlow. Back when
okay. The guy that we didn't know, hadn't seen enough of him to know any better, to not like him.
Exactly.
All right. Shout out to Paul Warlow. We'll be seeing you in a couple of weeks, so I'm looking forward to the reunion.
Yeah, because we're gonna see Wes Schweitzer in his face all day.
I'm looking forward to that Tevin Coleman versus Paul Warlow matchup in space. That's gonna be fun.
I'm looking forward to that Brian Schrader versus Paul Warlow matchup in space. Or that Alex Mack versus Paul Warlow matchup in space, where he's like, God damn it, these guys are so big, they're just destroying me.
There you go. All right, let's move to the Bears game. This is the first real game that we've talked about in months, Scott. I think this game is pretty straightforward in terms of the matchups and the strategy. The Bears are going to run the football, try to make this a low-scoring, physical sort of football game, challenge the Falcons in the trenches. The Falcons are going to try to answer that challenge and show why they have one of the better skill positions and team speed and all that stuff that we just talked with Brian Finneran about, all the strengths of this team, and sort of outclass the Bears from a talent standpoint and do what they did last year heading into this week. So is there any particular matchups, or I guess we should talk about the injuries and how they could affect it. Not oddly enough, because it's week one and it's not so strange to be healthy in week one, but the Falcons are pretty healthy. It seems like Julio's back, Taylor Gabriel's back. I guess the question is the ankle injuries to Brian Hill and DeMonte Casey enough to sort of keep them out of the lineup? But outside of those two, there really isn't a major injury unless I'm unaware of it. Maybe the listeners can comment on Facebook and let us know if there's anything we're overlooking. But it seems like most of the injuries on the Bears side of the ball, they're pretty beat up. A lot of key players. Kyle Long is dealing with an ankle injury. I don't think he's practiced or at least played in the preseason this year for them. Pernell McPhee's coming off a knee issue. I think he practiced today or yesterday, so he should be probable. Danny Trevathan's dealing with his knee injury, but he should be expected to go. Leonard Floyd has been dealing with a foot injury. Eddie Goldman had a concussion a couple of weeks ago, but he should be good to go. He should be out of the protocol this week. Marcus Wheaton, their number 3 receiver, is dealing with a broken finger. Prince Amukamara, their number 1 cornerback, is dealing with an ankle injury. So I do think, as far as the injuries are concerned, Long, Amukamara, and Wheaton are major ones. It sounds like McPhee, Trevathan, and Goldman and Floyd will play, but we'll find out as the week goes on. Any of those injuries stand out, and do you feel like they can affect some of these matchups, Scott?
I mean, that interior defensive line is pretty banged up, which is kind of helpful for Atlanta. I think that with a pretty healthy offensive line, Atlanta could control the clock and force the Bears out of there, running the ball all the time, trying to control the clock on their end. Atlanta controls the clock, scores 2 touchdowns quick and early, gets up 14-0, I think the game's going to be over real quick. I do think Atlanta wins, and I think it's going to be over really quickly because those guys aren't very if you pound down on a pass rusher, it takes them a minute to get his pass rush going. And if you don't pass the ball as much and you've got a line that can run the ball with, and I think Schweitzer is just as good of a run blocker as Chris Chester was. And that's not going to hurt anybody. He's just bigger. You got a guy who's 315 pounds and a guy who's 285 pounds. The guy who's 315 run blocks just as well. He's just got more power behind it because 30 pounds of weight, it only helps. So I think we're going to see a situation where the Falcons are just going to be able to run down the throats, especially if Eddie Goldman's still fighting some issues with concussion.
Yeah, I mean, that's the hope. The Bears are pretty beat up for a Week 1 team. Hopefully, for their sake, that was their major issue last year, at least in my opinion, particularly on defense. They all their key players couldn't stay healthy, and so you would hope for their sake that they don't have another repeat of that season where too many of their key players are nicked up. Obviously, if that happens this week, I'm not going to complain too much because it certainly benefits the Falcons. Let me see. We got a question from somebody. I want to make sure I give the credit. Oh, Evan Birchfield. Of course it was Evan. He asked, are there any matchups you're focused on for the Falcons-Bears? For me, it is the battle in the trenches. If there's one area of the Bears team that you would look at as a strength, it's their interior offensive line, it's their running game, it's their front seven. Obviously, the injuries to some of the key players could affect these things. But I am curious to see if the Falcons can sort of hold up in the trenches. When you go back and you look at all 7 of their losses last year, or all 6 of their losses last year, don't want to count one of them twice. You go back and you look at almost every one of those games, at least in 5 out of those 6 losses, if not all 6 of them, the Falcons mostly lost the game in the trenches. They got pushed around by the Eagles. They got pushed around by the Chiefs. They got pushed around in that first half by the Seahawks. The Patriots certainly sort of controlled that game on the line of scrimmage, among other games. Tampa Bay in that Week 1 game were very effective, winning the line of scrimmage and running the football and whatnot, and San Diego as well. So it is one of those things where I am curious to see if the Falcons can sort of rise above that, rise up, as they might say, with the additions of Poe and whatnot, and along the defensive line. And if Schweitzer winds up being an upgrade over Chris Chester, I'm not necessarily expecting that, but I do think it's possible. And so, to me, the Bears are not necessarily the biggest challenge that they'll face this year, but they are at least a challenge there. And if the Bears can basically show that the Falcons are vulnerable in the trenches, that necessarily isn't a positive sign for the rest of the season. So I want to see if this team can come out strong and sort of show that if that was a weakness last year in those 6 losses, that's not going to be a weakness this upcoming season, and basically transform into a strength, because we know the rest of the team. We know the secondary is one of the best in the league. We know they have great skill position players. We know they have an MVP caliber quarterback. So it's really that trench play that really is the big question mark for the Falcons. I don't think it's a major question mark. I expect them to answer the challenge. I think they will come out and sort of answer that bell. But if there is one area of concern, it is potentially if they can sort of handle a physical team in the trenches, and maybe the Bears could come out and try to punch them in the mouth on the road to start the season. Scott, did you have any thoughts on the matchups? We got a question. Bruce Leong asked about the matchups as well. Were there any matchups that you were sort of focused on?
I mean, the big one that I'm looking at is the Falcons receivers, not just wide receivers, but tight ends too, against the Bears defensive backs, the Bears secondary, and their linebackers in coverage. And you can even throw in the running backs for that. Atlanta's got a lot of options because you got Jones, Sanu, Hardy, Gabriel, and then you've got Freeman, Coleman, and Hooper and Toilolo. And when you've got all those different guys, you can really just attack teams up the seams. And I don't know if the Bears have what it takes to cover all those different guys. I don't think they've got the speed at linebacker. I don't think Freeman or Trevathan have the speed to really cover Coleman. I think they'll cover Freeman out the backfield okay, but I don't know if they've got the speed in the secondary to really hang with him. Like Adrian Amos is a good, solid, deep guy, but I don't think Quentin Demps can cover. I don't think Eddie Jackson's going to be healthy enough to really be impactful this year. And then, like, Marcus Cooper, he kind of sucks. Al Fuller kind of sucks. Amukamara's banged up. Like, Bryce Callahan, pretty terrible. They don't have a lot of great talent in their secondary. Where you're like, man, this guy can cover Julio Jones. And this guy can match up with Sanu, and this guy can match up. Like, maybe Amukamara can match up with Sanu. You know, maybe Fuller can match up with, like, Justin Hardy. But Fuller's been pretty terrible since I've seen him the past 2 years. He was great as a rookie the last 2 years. He's just been bad. And then Marcus Cooper sucks. I don't think there's anything great about him. I see a guy who's low average starting for the team because they're weak at quarterback. I think they're weak at safety. I don't think they have the talent to really hang out this passing. The thing that you worry about with the Falcons passing game is pass rush. You got a Keen Hicks who can eat up blockers. You got blockers. You got McPhee, Young, and rotating out on the outside. I think that's the part that scares you. You're not worried about them coverage. You're not worried about principal coverage. You're not worried about Cooper coverage. Those guys are running. I'm not worried about Taylor Gear. I'm not. Nope.
I think we still got some technical difficulties we need to work out, but yeah, we're a little rusty.
I think I figured out what it was. There's this button in the middle that I keep pressing that I shouldn't be. My bad, guys. But yeah, no, I'm not. I'm more worried about the pass rush than anything else. And I'm thinking if you pound them down in the run game, you set up that run, you set up the play actions like they did last year. That's the real way to do it.
Okay, I'm with you on that, Scott. At least the part I heard, I'm 100% agree with you. Let's pivot. I don't know if there's much else to say about the Bears game. It's a pretty straightforward game. The Falcons have a lot of firepower. The Bears will try to neutralize that by making it into a shorter game with their running attack, and we'll see if the Falcons can sort of take care of business. They should. Everything on paper says that they will, and we'll just find out on Sunday if the paper lives up to the reality. Let's pivot to a new segment that we're going to do on this show. We'll try to do it weekly because we will try to be on here weekly, unlike the last couple of weeks. And we're doing call-outs of the week. And this is an opportunity for Scott or I, both of us, to call out a player, a coach, a thing. If we had a bad order at Taco Bell that week or something, we call out Taco Bell. I can say, personally, I went to Taco Bell, tried the online app. It worked perfectly for me. I didn't get my empanada, but I won't call out Taco Bell. My call out, it was topical 2 weeks ago, but my call out is the whole notion of the national anthem protests and sort of I think the overreaction that people have to it. I get people having their issues with it, but people basically deciding that they're giving up on football, their favorite football team, because a handful of guys, most recently or most infamously recently, the Cleveland Browns. I just don't get sort of how this is the thing that causes you to sort of divorce yourself from football. I'm not necessarily saying that you have to agree with it. You're more than welcome to have your own opinion, but I don't get people's reaction to it being so visceral that they're like, I'm boycotting the NFL for the rest of the year. I'm giving up on the Browns. I'm giving up on the Eagles. I'm giving up on the Seahawks because this player decided to take a knee or raised his fist during the national anthem. I don't get that, but if you feel like that's how you feel about it, then you're more than welcome to feel that way, and ain't nobody gonna miss you. And you're probably racist call cheering in the stands. So I would say good riddance. Maybe the NFL feels a little bit different, but it is what it is. Scott, who do you want to call out?
Well, I'm going to agree with you on the whole, if that's what's causing you to say, oh, hey, I'm not going to watch football anymore, you probably have your priorities fucked. Sorry for the language, but, I mean, that's calling it what it is. Now that the disclaimer's out the way and we've got the legal guys all happy. But yeah, no, your priorities are pretty screwed up if that's what's causing you to stop watching. Not domestic violence, not anything. Because a dude takes a knee because he's protesting people getting killed by cops. Not just any people, minorities, but still, he's basically protesting that cops are killing people, and that's why he's taking a knee. And you're going to stop watching football for that? I mean, the logic hole is completely there. I'm just going to point that out. Anyway, speaking of guys who I am not very happy with, it's Rashid Hageman and the Atlanta Falcons' response to the Rashid Hageman situation. In March 2016, he gets arrested for domestic violence. It. That's fine. Rashid Hageman's an idiot and an asshole for doing it, for beating up his woman right in front of his kid. That's just, I can't comprehend that because that's just stupid and just probably the worst thing you can do. On top of that, the Atlanta Falcons, once they find out about it, they knew about it in March. I might give them till April, but they knew about it. This is going on. This guy's going to miss games eventually. You kind of sit him sort of for the first part, and then you bring him back, and he actually does really well in the playoffs. And then he's having a good camp, and then you cut him now for something he did in March of 2016. You should have cut him in March of 2016. Even if you had no reason behind it, you'd been like, all right, well, here's the deal. He's cut. We have our reasons. They will come out. We'll understand. And nobody would have complained. The issue is you can't have it both ways. You can't be like, oh, hey, we're going to keep our guys together. We're going to be like, it's just frustrating. Because you're either going to cut a guy for a reason and take a stand right there, or you're going to cut a guy after it's the wrong time. They should have cut him before the season, given someone else a shot in training camp, and probably drafted a defensive tackle in 2016 to replace him. That was probably the right
Okay. So, all right, Scott. We got a question on Facebook before we get to the mailbag questions. And someone asked, or not Facebook, YouTube, because we're live on the YouTube as well. Jane Kevin Hong asked, what do y'all think about the new Seahawks logo?
Atrocious.
Okay.
It's just awful. It's absolutely awful.
I can't not look away from it, though, because it's just staring into my soul.
It's like one of those Chinese crested dogs that has like all the dogs that look like they're naked and they just have like patches of hair here and there. It looks like one of those. It looks like a naked mole rat, just with random patches of hair. That's kind of the thing. You want to look away, but you can't. It's just a trainer. It's all.
All right, so let's get into the rest of the mailbag. We got a backlog of questions. We got some more recent questions towards the end, but interesting enough, you guys asked some questions that are still kind of topical, even though you asked them 2 weeks ago. First, Digital Demon asks, what did you think of our front seven? Vic, Tack, Poe, Grady, Dion, Duke, and Campbell.
I'm a fan of it. This might be the best front seven we've had in Atlanta since '98. Legitimate. That's how good it is. That front seven had 40 sacks. It was one of the best against the run. The only thing I'm really worried about is depth at one technique. I think three technique, you're fine, but one technique is the only real question I've had.
Yeah, I think the front seven looks good. As Brian said earlier, if you missed it at the top of the show when we talked to Brian Finneran of 680 The Fan, he talked about sort of when the first team defense was in the game in the preseason, they look outstanding. I agree with that. They look ready to go. I think the front seven is going to be – I thought it was the biggest weakness of the defense last year. I don't necessarily think I will be saying that again about the 2017 defense. I think all those guys look good. As for the depth at D-tackle, I don't think it's a major issue, at least these first couple of games, because you're only going to play maybe about 15 snaps in the base, assuming everything goes according to plan against the Bears this week. If the offense gets out to an early lead, it'll be even less than that. Against Green Bay, against Detroit, you're playing probably at most 15 to 20% of the snaps in base, which is only about less than 15. It's really that Buffalo game was the first game where you're going to need probably a healthy rotation in your base defense, which is potentially where Hageman was likely to be deployed this year, just because I think they have enough bodies at the nickel on the interior that we were going to likely see Hageman play that base role to sort of keep Jared and Poe fresh. So I don't necessarily think it's going to be a major issue unless obviously there's an injury between now and that Week 4 game. So I think maybe then we might have to see this team sort of make a move at the D-tackle position to get ready for that game in particular. But then again, with Buffalo and sort of their question marks, that could be another sort of game that the offense could get up ahead and not make that as big an issue as it possibly could be. So I think the front seven, to answer your question, Digital Demon, I think the front seven looks great. D-Rock the Party asks, is Shelby's role only as depth if Upshaw is the based strong side defensive end and Crawford has his prior role as a nickel DT? Will he be active? I'm assuming he's talking about Shelby.
I'm still trying to figure out Shelby's role. I do think it could be a situation where Shelby's inactive. Because right now, if I look at inactives, you're going to throw probably Pastor on the inactive list. That's one. You're going to throw Brian Hill on there. So that's two. You're going to throw Harlow on there. There's three. I'm just looking down the roster, trying to figure out exactly who. Weedy Ray Wilson, which would be four. Just trying to, the rest of it's stuff like Nick Williams maybe for five. And then you got two more spots. So, I could see a situation where Shelby is on the bench, just chilling and active most weeks. The Falcons have a lot of depth on the defensive line, and he'd be the odd man out. When you look at the total of the 8-man that you're going to see, Upshaw, Jarrett, Poe, and then Reed. And then in the nickel, you've got Beasley, Claiborne, Crawford, and then Tack. So that's the four. Whoever wasn't listed, that's Derek Shelby. Derek Shelby's depth. I mean, there's nothing wrong with being depth right now either. He's depth on a team that could potentially win the Super Bowl.
Okay. I think the suspension of Hageman sort of. I thought there was a possibility that Shelby could be inactive, but I think with only with Hageman gone, I don't think there's really any chance. I think you sort of compensate a little bit. There may be situations where Shelby is playing that DN spot and you kick Upshaw inside the D tackle in the base package. I think there may be opportunities for Shelby to kick inside to that one of those D tackle spots in the base defense with Upshaw in the field. I think with I think. Sorry, I keep saying I think. I thought Shelby and Upshaw were about even in terms of their competition this summer. And I do wonder if that's going to be a position where maybe Upshaw begins the season as a starter, but if Shelby manages to outplay him early on, he could sort of regain his spot, especially that he's coming off of the Achilles tear from last season. And so, as we get into October, as we get in November, as he gets further along in his recovery from that we might see Shelby have the opportunity to sort of assert himself more as a pivotal player in the Falcons rotation. It always interesting with the Falcons because under Dan Quinn, whatever the plan is at the defensive line rotation at week one, it definitely every single season, 2015 and 2016, changes about midway through the season. So whatever the plan looks to be right now, which I think as Scott outlined is probably the case, we might get to week 6 and it'll be completely different. So I think for the time being, I think, yes, Crawford is primarily going to be a nickel D tackle that's going to sub in for Poe in those situations. I think Shelby will be mixed in the base defense. I think Upshaw will be primarily a base defensive end, but I do think because of his versatility to play, to be moved around, we might see him get some nickel snaps inside. We might see him get some base snaps inside, besides Poe or Jarrett. So, I think Shelby will be active. If I was guessing who those last two inactives were, in the addition to the 5 that Scott named, I would say one of the linebackers, either Tripp or Grace, and one of the DBs, in addition to Bleedy Ray Wilson, which I think would probably at this point be Casey. At least certainly this week, given his injury issue. So we'll see if that changes. But I think those 7 guys would probably be the most likely guys that you will see inactive any given week, assuming injuries aren't a factor. Okay, D-Rock the Party's next question is, how do you think Ja'Tyrius Jones looked, and do you think he makes the final 53? Obviously, we know the answer to the second part of that question, but what were your thoughts on JT Jones this summer?
I thought he was pretty good. He was creating pressure. I actually liked him better than Odom. I think long-term he's got a better role as long as he develops the way that they think he can. He's athletically probably the best free agent edge guy they had, and I think he may not be an impact player right away, but I think he could eventually be that impact, rotational third guy behind Tack and Vic in the pass rush. Basically taking Brooks Reed's role. He's a great athlete, and I just think that he'd be a good fit. And his issue was mainly hands, and he made the practice squad. So, you can't really be too down on the guy when he makes the practice squad.
Yeah, I thought Jones started strong. I think he sort of petered out a little bit as the preseason wore on. Still was making plays, but just wasn't as consistently popping as he was in the first couple of games. I think, long term, I think he's a developmental guy. He's a little raw, as Scott said, with his hands and sort of his technique and adding some a repertoire of moves. He's not a guy like Beasley or Tack that's just going to straight up blow by starting offensive tackles with his first step or anything like that. So I think he's a nice developmental guy that we can sort of keep this year and hopefully into next year, and see if he can make that second year jump that we often see with pass rushers. We saw it with Big. We saw it with, even though he didn't play, we saw it with Maponga. We saw it with Massaquoi. Those guys tend to make a pretty big leap going into their second year once they start to adjust to the speed of the game. And we'll see if Jones if he comes back next year, will make that similar leap and potentially, as Scott said, challenge for a rotation, a role, and potentially push a guy like Brooks Reed or whoever may or may not replace Brooks Reed next offseason for a roster spot.
An interesting thing with JT Jones, too, is he's very similar athletically to Rob Ninkovich, and that's kind of the guy I could see him being long-term.
There you go. Yeah, and Ninkovich, it took him a while to sort of settle in the NFL. It took him a while for Belichick to get around to him and work his magic on him. So, we'll see if JT Jones can sort of hit the ground running a little bit earlier than that.
Yeah.
All right.
Ninkovich eventually became like a 7-8 sack guy. So
yeah. Ninkovich turned out to be a pretty good player. At Matt Stars asked, last year I think we were all worried to some extent about the Cowboys' offensive line and Zeke controlling the line of scrimmage and clock. How are we better equipped this year?
Well, the Cowboys' offensive line is a lot different this year. They don't have Doug Free. They moved Lael Collins over to the right tackle spot. It looks like they're starting Jonathan Cooper at left guard, and it's kind of a ballsy move because Cooper's been pretty atrocious as a left guard this year, or as a left guard throughout his career. So I think they've got holes on their offense. It'll be interesting to see how well everybody adjusts to that. And Collins switching from left guard to right tackle, that is a kind of weird move. Even though he's always been a tackle, it is going to be considered a bit of a weird move for a guy like that. I think Atlanta matches up better, though, when you've got a guy like Poe in the middle. Brady Jarrett looks like he's about 305, 310, just looking at him. He looks a little bigger than he was last year. I'm not too worried about it. You've got a guy like Poe in the middle eating up double teams. Because I think Poe can sit there and hold up Frederick. I think Jarrett can hold up more. I think, I'm not really worried about Collins going against Upshaw. Like, Collins will win some, Upshaw will win some. They're about, that NFL average like that. Their position. Collins has potential better, but the issue comes on the weak side of Tyron. He is very pancake anybody from the left side. Probably the best left tackle in the game right now. Yes, even better than Joe Thomas. He is an amazing left tackle. And I think if anything, he's the guy that is captain. Is Tyron. So, anyway, you got to see bad. Guys are going. I'm more worried about. He's healthy. That's good.
I think I'm not worried about the Cowboys' offensive line at all. I think I don't think you could look at Jonathan Cooper as any more of a liability potentially than Wes Schweitzer is. So if you're not concerned about Wes Schweitzer, there's no reason to be concerned about Jonathan Cooper starting there. Lael Collins looks like a natural at that right tackle spot. So I do think the Cowboys are still going to, if not number one, they'll have, maybe Oakland is the number one offensive line. So Cowboys move down to 2 or 3. So I think, I think that's still going to be an issue for the Falcons. And that's going to be something that they're going to have to be challenged because, Travis Frederick, Zach Martin, those guys getting to the second level and taking out our linebackers would create some problems. That was going to be a major issue last year if we played the Cowboys in the postseason. We'll find out later this season, week 10, I think, if that continues to be an issue. I think the addition of Dontari Poe will help a lot in terms of keeping guys like Frederick and potentially Martin from making those second-level blocks. I think having Grady Jarrett be much improved and be more asked to be more of a disruptor and sort of knife through that offensive line and sort of create opportunities in the backfield than necessarily being a guy that's as to hold the point of attack will help. I think Vic Beasley, potentially being more used as a linebacker if we use the base defense against Dallas as opposed to putting him on the defensive line in the nickel, I think will help. I think obviously the young linebackers all making improvements like Jones and Campbell, as well as Duke Riley being in the mix, I think will help. I think it's still a concern. I think there's no reason to sit here and be like, and at least until we get to see this team defensive line play on the field and go out there. Like if they go out there and dominate Chicago's offensive line, that's certainly a positive. If they go out, Green Bay's got one of the better, at least in terms of pass protection, offensive lines in the league. They go out there and just are feasting at Aaron Rodgers in week 2. If they go out and Detroit's offensive line is beat up and they go out there and sort of take advantage of their weaknesses up front, then we might be having a very different conversation about whether or not they can hold up against a Dallas offensive line. But I do think that is a significant, until we see evidence to the contrary, I do think that will be a significant challenge for them. But I do certainly think they're better equipped to handle it this year than they were last year. That was something that kept me up at night in the postseason in January last year. I don't think it's going to keep me up at night when we get to November and whatnot. But it is something that I do feel like if you can run the football and control the clock, you can keep this offense off the field, and particularly for a team like Dallas who has major issues on their defense, major issues in the secondary. That's how you have to win the game. And there's no team other than maybe the Oakland Raiders that's better equipped to play that style of football against the Falcons than Dallas. So I think it is a concern, but not as big a concern as it was a year ago. All right. Digital Demon asks, thoughts on the rookies, and what do you think they can do to fix the issues that some are having, and how do you think Tack looked?
Tack looked raw. He looked good. Great first step. Able to get around guys. Explosive, but raw. The real issue that I have with Tack is his hand usage. Still needs some work. And I think they'll get it around. He's a hell of a football player. It's just he's going to be a bit of a project in some aspects. Now, do I think he could do what Vic Beasley did last year most of the time, which is just use his speed, go blow around the left tackle, and create some pressure? Oh, yeah. I think he'll do that. I think he'll get a couple sacks and clean up just doing that. But I think past that, he's going to have to learn a couple things. And whether it's a spin move, whether it's counter overall, any of that, just he's got to learn something different. And I do think that he's got a better that, but it's basically just using his natural speed to push the tackle into the quarterback and take
it. Yeah. I think the rookies look good. I think Tack looked good, had as good a start to this preseason as you would want from him, particularly given a limited role, being able to use that speed and sort of really challenge the edge against offensive tackles. It's one thing to see him do it against Colorado or Utah or Washington State, but to do it against NFL starting caliber left tackles like Ali Villanueva and DJ Humphries is a completely different matter. So hopefully he'll continue to develop. I think for the rest of the rookie class, I thought Duke Riley, he was a guy that people were talking up and sort of expecting to come in, hit the ground running, and sort of run away with that outside linebacker spot. That wasn't necessarily the case. I do think he had a good summer, though. And I think, it's only a matter of time. If that's not week one and if we don't see him in the base defense week one playing that weak side spot, which I suspect we will, it's only a matter of time before we see that happening. Sean Harlow had a really rocky start in the preseason. That first game was, not to be frank about it, it was one of the worst offensive line performances I've ever seen a player have in a Falcons uniform. But he came back strong in the subsequent games and really sort of was, at least as far as the second team unit goes, was one of the better blockers they had. Casey looked good until he got hurt. Looked really sharp in coverage, not so much on special teams, but was really playing fast and physical, playing that center field, and looked comfortable coming up and defending the run and breaking up passes as well. So that's a positive for him. Who else? Brian Hill. I know people. We talked about this on a previous show where people are like he's the biggest disappointment ever, or something like that. I never understood that.
He was playing behind the shitty backup offensive line. Like,
I mean, that was most of it. Like, you looked at him as an individual when you isolate the individual, as you want to do when you review games and watch film. He did well as an individual for the most part. He was just playing behind an offensive line that didn't give him daylight. I don't get the sort of backlash against Brian Hill. But again, that tends to happen often when you have some people hyping up guys, and then people get this expectation that he's going to come in and I guess be the next Zeke Elliott for whatever reason. But that should teach people, I guess, that don't listen to those people. If you were listening to somebody and you thought they were hyping up Brian Hill, stop listening to those people when it comes to this stuff. Because I just don't get. I didn't hear that, and I don't get where that was coming from. But I think Brian Hill's, on track to being a very successful NFL player. I remember Jason Snelling didn't have, if I recall correctly, I don't think he had the best first summer in Atlanta, but he turned out pretty well. So, what else? Who else did we draft? Eric Saubert, Rocky summer. I was a little surprised that he made the team. Go back to the original question. I thought he would be on the practice squad, but he'll play special teams this year. He'll get a couple of snaps on offense maybe, and we'll see what he can do and see if he can sort of be game ready if called upon to sort of contribute as a backup tight end. But I think all these guys are well on their way to having some sort of success this year and future success, if not this season. So I think the rookie class looks solid. I think Tack looks good. I think he'll be a bigger contributor early in the season than I was certainly expecting going into the season coming off of his injury. So, I don't know if he's going to set sack records for rookies or anything like that, but I do expect him to contribute in the rotation on pass downs. So, positive step for him. On that note, Falcons Fury at South Life Gold asks a question about Tack. Is Tack developing faster than Vic did? Small sample size, but it looks like it to me.
I think he had a better rookie preseason, but again, we'll know for sure when we get to the actual important part, which is the regular season games. When we're seeing him come out there for 500 snaps and we can really evaluate those 500 snaps and really see what he did, we'll be good.
There you go. Yeah. Ditto. Evan Birchfield asks, are there any position battles? Oh, okay. We are. Never mind. I thought I got all those training camp questions out. Sorry, Evan, but there's about position battles, which are over. Nerdy Bird ATO asks, what's your prediction for the most improved second-year player for the Falcons?
It's tough because the Falcons had a lot of really good players as rookies. But if I had to go with the most improved second-year player, it's going to be Wes Schweitzer. Because he went from not being good enough to even be active on game day to starting at right guard and potentially looking like an improvement over Chris Chester. At least as a pass protector. As a run blocker, he looks about even. But as a pass protector, he looks like he holds up better against strength and holds his anchor better. So, I mean, if that's what you're getting a guy who can hold his anchor better, seems to understand his position a lot more. He really needed a year to sit and learn the position behind a guy who's been doing it for a decade. And that's what helped him learn it. So, for me, I think Schweitzer, actually really two guys if you include Levitri. Levitri's been playing for almost a decade now. So when you take those two guys and you have them impart all their knowledge into Schweitzer, and then you put Schweitzer out there who's got all the physical tools, who's got the mental aptitude, he just needed to go from not being able to play to, hey, he might play 1,000 snaps this year and be perfectly good, maybe give up like 2 sacks, be a solid run block. That's all you're hoping. Don't give up a lot of hits, don't give up a lot of sacks, be a good solid run block. He gave up a total of 5 hits. It was a good run block. Everybody would be like, man, Schweitzer was the best thing that Thomas Dimitroff ever made. So I think that'd be the guy. And I think he's going to be able to do it.
All right. I think you could answer this question multiple ways. I think if you're looking at, obviously Schweitzer is going to go from a guy that didn't play last year to a starter. That's a pretty big jump. Even if he's not a good starter, that's a pretty massive jump. I think Hooper's another good candidate for this, just because he started the season as the number 3 tight end. He started the season basically in the same role that Eric Saubert is currently in, and now he's a starter. So it's a similar sort of pathway. That's an easy answer to that. But I'll throw a curveball, and I'll look mainly at Deion Jones and Keanu Neal. Um, I know, I know. For me personally, I think Keanu Neal was really the superior rookie last year, and I sort of expect him to show significant growth this year. Um, but that being said, I think his baseline for improvement is a little bit higher than Deion Jones's. Is I know Deion Jones made a ton of splash plays. Not to diminish what he did as a rookie, I think he had a great rookie season. Um, Probably, I don't think it was as good on a snap to snap, week to week basis as other people do in terms of like talking about him being defensive rookie of the year. I certainly think he was in the conversation, top 5 rookie, certainly, but not necessarily better than Joey Bosa. But I think based off of what we've seen so far this summer, if looking at sort of his production in the preseason with however many snaps it is, like 20 or whatever it is, he's looked really good. He's looked like he's much more physical, much more aggressive when it comes to attacking blocks. We know the speed, we know the range, we know the athleticism. That was there. That was abundant last year. It was really about, can he, when those offensive linemen are making those reach blocks on him on the second level, for lack of a better term, he was terrible at that for the most part last season. And it wasn't really an issue because a lot of teams didn't have to or couldn't run the ball because they were playing from behind. And, it never really got exposed too much last season. But it looks like he's improved tremendously. That was an area I thought that was a big question because he wasn't good at that at LSU. And so it was a question whether or not he could improve at that in the NFL. Guys don't improve at the area of their weaknesses as much as people like to believe in the NFL. That's not what it's about. It's more about refining and improving your strengths than necessarily making your weaknesses into strengths when it comes to player development. But at least based off of what we've seen this preseason, and so I'm eager against this Chicago Bears team where that will be put to the test. How physical he is as a downhill run defender, and he could certainly qualify as the most improved second-year player just because that area of his game was a legit weakness that was sort of overlooked by a lot of people last year because they were so enamored, and rightly so, by the forced fumbles and the pick sixes and sort of all those times where he seemed to track a ball carrier or receiver 20 yards across the field and make that tackle sideline to sideline. So, yeah, I'll throw Deion Jones into the mix there. Okay, Matt Stars asks, what have you gleaned from Steve Sarkisian's play calling, if anything, during the preseason? His creativity is well regarded, but the play calling in the NFL is new.
It seems very Shanahan-esque, kind of sticking with the run game first and then going play action behind it and trying to integrate his pass and his run attack. I mean, I liked Steve Sarkisian. I saw a lot of the same kind of stuff that he was doing back in Washington, back at USC. I was always covering West Coast games when I was at Bleacher Report, and they'd always be like, hey, you got USC versus Washington. Hey, you got Washington versus Cal. And I would loved watching Steve Sarkisian offense because it was a lot of just inside and outside zone runs. To me, I was like, man, this looks like a Shanahan offense every time I watched it. So that's why I kept saying, like, I don't think it's going to be an issue to Aaron every single time. He was like, oh, well, we don't know what Sarkisian's going to do. We don't know what he's going to do. I'm like, no, dude, he runs a Shanahan. That's what he runs. That's what he's always run. And to me, it's exactly what I've been expecting. It's just a simple standard play call he had when he was in college. That amazingly, like, on first down, we're going to pound the rock post. On second down, we're going to run a play action. We're going to call a play action. Oh, hey, here's a double here's a double tight end set. Let's run a quick screen out. Just different things that.
My stance with Sarkisian wasn't that we didn't know what he was going to do. I just disagreed when people said this is what Sark likes to do in his offense, and my stance was more just Stark doesn't have an offense because he hasn't really developed a specific offense. Like Kyle Shanahan came to Atlanta in 2015 with an offense that he had been developing since 2008 and been calling and implementing since 2008. Sark has changed his offense so much over that same period of time that he's basically sort of a chameleon. And I think that's a positive trait when it comes to adapting another person's offense, as he will with Kyle Shanahan. But it is one of those things where when you're calling somebody else's offense, it's a question of whether or not you will, as Brian Finneran said, again, check out that show on iTunes if you missed it, or YouTube. I think one of the things that you wonder about is he going to be able to execute and call the plays and call the right plays in the right situations as effectively as Kyle Shanahan was, because it's not his offense. He's run a very similar offense, certainly. The offense he ran at USC under Pete Carroll was essentially the same offense, but it's not the same offense.
But when he ran at Washington was essentially the same offense.
Yeah,
it wasn't until he went back to USC and dealt with all these prospects that weren't his, that were overweight, offensive linemen that weren't great zone runners. That's when he was being the chameleon. When he was in Alabama, that's when he was being the chameleon. Going back to Atlanta, that's this type of offense he's been running, that he basically came up running at USC, at Washington. So that's why I trust those kind of spots versus his second run at USC as the head coach or at Alabama. I don't even consider that game at Alabama as really anything. Like, that wasn't his offense. That was Lane Kiffin's offense, and didn't know what the hell he
was. I don't quite agree with that stance. I get what you're saying. I think he more implemented a change in his offense at Washington once Jake Locker left. That I don't think we could say that wasn't his offense, but I think that was an example of him playing more of a spread offense, which was getting with the times, that was and running more tempo and more RPOs in his offense in Washington before he went to USC. And I think that's a great example of him being a chameleon, of him looking around and taking what he's seeing in the rest of the college football landscape, operating effectively, and implementing that into his own offense and adapting his own offense. So again, I think even though that's a question mark, I do think it's worthy of being considered a strength of his. As far as so far with the play calling, as Scott said, I don't think there's a whole lot from at least gleaning from the preseason, there's a whole lot to believe that those things have changed. I think we'll see more 3 wide receiver sets, less fullback, probably a little less play action. But again, those are all things that the Falcons started to implement in December and January of last season. They ran a lot more 3 wide receivers. They dialed back the play action. It was basically they realized, this Taylor Gabriel guy, he's kind of good. Let's get him more opportunities to make plays. And that's, I think, essentially what Sarkisian is going to be asked to do this year. And basically run the playoff version of Kyle Shanahan's offense as opposed to the regular season version, which was a lot of Patrick DeMarco, a lot of tight ends. So I think Sarkisian will do well. It's just a question of when we have to make those in-game adjustments later on in the season against some quality defenses, against a team like Patriots who are known for their ability to make adjustments. Will he be able to match wits with the Bill Belichick's of the world and take care of business? And I think at this point, it remains to be seen. I don't think there's any reason to be skeptical about it. I just don't think there's any reason to be overly optimistic. I think there's a learning curve in the NFL. He's never called plays against an NFL defense. He's never matched wits with any of these defensive coordinators. So could he do it? Absolutely. Have we seen him do it? No. So I think that's a question that needs to be answered. So we'll see what happens. Okay, Matt Stars asks, are there any systems where running backs like Tevin Coleman and Devontae Freeman are used at the same time? What would splitting one or both of them do to the base or nickel defense?
So what's nice about Tevin Coleman and Devontae Freeman is how good they are as receivers. I do understand why people are saying, hey, let's run more situations where we have both on the field. You've got a couple different ways you can go about it. You can do a split back, you can do a full house set, or you can do a shotgun with both of them out there. And then when you split one of them out on the sides, you're basically saying, hey, this guy's going to be a receiver unless we run a jet sweep, which I would love to see a situation where they've got Tevin Coleman sitting there in a shotgun, and then they snap it, and then Ryan tosses it off in a shovel pass type jet sweep out of a shotgun to Coleman, who's got a wide open lane just destroying people. But yeah, no, I mean splitting one or both of them out in the base, put running backs against linebackers who have no business covering those runners. Putting them out against the nickel, honestly, I'd say bring them back in to kind of work the space.
Yeah. I mean, you don't see it very often in terms of systems that use both tailbacks at the same time. Some teams do it. I know Buffalo did it quite a bit with Gillisley and McCoy, and sort of having that, three tailbacks in the backfield with, I think, Jerome Felton last year at times. I think you can use it. I don't necessarily know if that's going to be something the Falcons are going to use a lot this year. I don't think it's necessarily something they have to use a lot this year. I like Tevin Coleman, certainly. He's probably the fastest player on the team. It's either him or Taylor Gabriel. But I don't get why you would be a more advantageous situation of splitting him out wide as opposed to Taylor Gabriel as the third wide receiver. Now, maybe if you took Mohamed Sanu off the field and you said, okay, Tevin Coleman, you line up here in the slot and run a deep route, and we'll just have Julio, Tevin, and Taylor Gabriel just running, deep routes and saying, let's go deep because we got all the speed on the field. Okay, maybe. But again, I think if you're talking about every down situations, the nuance, guy, I'm not the world's biggest fan of Mohamed Sanu, but I certainly think he's a more polished route runner and more likely to get open on any given down than Tevin Coleman would be running routes, or Devontae Freeman running routes. So it's certainly something I think you can certainly sprinkle into the offense as sort of sort of package, or something that you can say, okay, let's throw a wrench into this team's game plan, and let's sort of challenge them to have to make an adjustment with their base and nickel package. Are they going to put a safety on the running back? Are they going to put a linebacker out there? Are they going to put a cornerback out there? I certainly think that's something that you can do offensively. I don't think it's necessarily something that you have to do a significant amount of in order to be an effective offense at moving the ball. But there's certain situations where I think having that extra speed out there on the field could be advantageous and sort of be able to dictate what you want the defense to do and sort of take advantage of matchups that way. We got a couple of questions about the right guard battle, but I don't necessarily know if we haven't already answered those. So let's jump ahead to Jason at your boy J94. He asked, does Jermaine Grace see any reps on defense with Leroy Reynolds injured, or is he a special teams only guy?
I don't think he's going to see reps on defense unless there's an injury. So I'm going to say special teams only for now. Maybe later in the season we'll see him a couple of snaps on defense, kind of like how we saw with Leroy Reynolds, kind of how we saw Sean Weatherspoon. Even when everybody was healthy, they saw a couple snaps here and there. But I think right now he's going to basically be what Paul Warlow was last year in terms of what he does, which is very few snaps on defense, maybe 20, 25, and then a total of, like, basically the rest of it's going to be all special teams.
Yeah, I think special teams is going to be I don't see, unless there's an injury, I don't see any reason why you would say we'd rather have Jermaine Grace out there instead of Devondre Campbell, Deion Jones, or Duke Riley. I think Ishmael is there's still issues with Ishmael playing that linebacker position. I don't think he had a great summer. But then again, the great Nate Stupar didn't have a great summer that one year before he came out and looked really effective in 2015. So maybe Ishmael is just saving it all for the real games. So I don't expect Grace to get any playing time really on defense unless there's multiple injuries at that spot, at that weak side linebacker spot, because I think Campbell, Ishmael, and Riley are all ahead of him. So, I think we'll just see him primarily as a special teams guy. We should see him this week on special teams. I think he'll be very effective in that role. His speed is an asset, covering kicks, covering punts. And we could very well be looking at him as being the best player on our special teams by year's end. So that's something to keep an eye out. And maybe we just found our next Nate Stupar, our next, if this is not too old school for you guys, Artie Ulmer. Trying to think, was there another special teams guy that sort of shined in the intervening years? Ike Reese, there you go. I was trying to think of who's the Moore guy. Ike Reese. So I think there's
guy.
Yeah, I think it's possible that Jermaine Grace could be that guy for the Dan Quinn regime. So we'll see. All right. We got another question from your homie Brian. He asked, prediction. Do you guys think the Falcons will win a Super Bowl before Matt Ryan retires?
I'm going to be bold and say they win 2.
There you go. I hope so. If you had asked me on February 4th, or February 5th, I would have said definitely. Unfortunately, circumstances changed very quickly on that. I think Matt Ryan's going to play another 7 years. I think the Falcons will definitely have at least one more opportunity. So, I'll be positive for once. If you ask me in 5 minutes, I'll probably say no. But for these 5 minutes, I'll say yeah. Let me see. I think we got a couple more questions last-minute questions on Twitter. Falcons Fury at South Life Gold asks, what would be the ideal way to use Julio in the red zone? More like Sark said he wanted to.
Honestly, I like a lot of bunch sets. I think if you put a guy like Cooper, Gabriel, and Julio in a bunch set, or actually Cooper, Sanu, and Julio in a bunch set, and just run interwoven routes, one of those three is going to get open, and a lot of times teams will just get lost in trying to get Julio. You can even run a situation where two guys are running up and out or running corner routes, and you have Julio running an empty drag, and Julio will take that natural pick all the time. So that's what I would do. I would scheme Julio on that kind of route all the time and just say, you know what, let's just get this done. Let's have to get the ball.
I think that's a good way of doing it. I think you just throw a variety of looks. I always love the sort of classic, let's split them out wide. Let's pull when run fades to them. Fades are sort of an iffy play, but when you have Julio Jones, I'll take the risk of throwing some fades to Julio Jones. I feel pretty confident in him. And so if the defense decides to move a safety out, because a lot of teams like to double and bracket Julio, that leaves them with one less defender in the box. Matt Ryan can audible to a run, and you can just pound it down their throat. If not, then you got a one-on-one situation with Julio on the outside. Other than maybe Patrick Peterson, Xavier Rhodes, and Aqib Talib, one of which is on our schedule this year. So I really like Julio in pretty much any matchup he would face against a cornerback. Maybe the Xavier Rhodes one would be the only one where I would like, oh, that guy stands a chance in a one-on-one sort of jump ball situation against Julio Jones. And even then, I don't really think he necessarily stands a great chance, but it's a small one. So, that would be another way in addition to what Scott said. All right, guys, that was our show. We apologize for the technical difficulties that we had earlier, the multiple technical difficulties. We will work out the kinks later on. If you missed our interview with Brian Finneran at the top of the show, you can find the audio of that on Facebook and YouTube on the show's page, Falcon Central Radio. On YouTube, you can find it under the Pro Football Central channel. There, you can find links on ProFootballCentral.com as well. iTunes, if you're listening to this on iTunes, you're like, what issues? Because you just heard it. It's been spliced into the thing. If you want to find our iTunes feed, I know there's been some issues with the feed. You can find the link to the active feed on Pro Football Central. Just go to any episode of this podcast, and there's a link in the description of any episode. If you guys want to get your mailbag questions in, use the hashtag Falcons Mailbag. Tweet at me. I'm FalcFan. Scott is at Karasik S. You should see that on somewhere on your screen. At Falcons PFC is the show's Twitter handle. Please rate and review us on iTunes, 5 stars if you can. That helps more people find the show. Give us a like on YouTube. Subscribe to Pro Football Central as well as Scott's YouTube page, Scar988. And Facebook. Give us a like on Facebook, and you'll never miss a second of the show if you do. So that's it, guys. We'll be back next week with less technical difficulties to talk about this Bears game and to preview the upcoming Green Bay